Hi Java students, in today's video we're going to talk about the fact that arrays, specifically our two-dimensional arrays, are what we consider to be pass by value. I'm going to talk about a little bit more of what that means in this video, so if you are looking for information on just two-dimensional arrays, you are in the wrong video. Head somewhere else. This is going to be talking about two-dimensional arrays specifically with methods involved. So, in Java, when we have some variables before, technically all of our variables are what we consider pass by value, but our two-dimensional arrays are a special type of this pass by value. And here's what I mean. If I create a variable called x, and I set it to be a value of 20, that variable exists inside of the method where it's created. So it exists inside of this main method. So now if I make a new method that doesn't have any return. So let's say it's a public static void, and I'm going to call it int method. If I create a new method that takes an input of an integer, so I'm going to call it int input, and it does something to that input, like let's say decrements that input, so subtracts from that input, but it doesn't have any return, and it doesn't return the new value. When I call this method on my variable x, nothing is going to actually change to my variable x. Because what happens is it's not actually passing in the specific variable x, it is passing in the value 20 into the method. 20 is becoming 19, but then we do nothing with this line. We don't return it or do anything with it. And so nothing is changed about my x value in the end. So in order to prove that, here's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to print out the value of x before and right after I've done that method call. And that's going to show us that I created a value of a variable of x that started at 20. So I print out 20. Even after I call that method where I'm supposed to be decrementing that amount, when I print out x again, nothing happened. In order to make this a method where we actually change the value of x, we need this method to return the new value back. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this from a void method to actually return a variable, and the thing that we are going to return, we don't say input minus minus, we're going to say the input minus 1, because we're no longer trying to just change that variable. We're going to just return that variable minus 1. We also could probably say input minus minus and then return that new input. But now what I need to do is in that method, I need to save the value of x equal to that method call so that that return gets saved back into my variable x. So then when I print it out the second time, this time I will expect things to change. First it was 20, now it's 19. But I had to actually use a return to decrement and change that. So what I'm trying to say and get at here is in the version where we don't have any returns, this method doesn't actually change the values of the variable that I've created, x. Now, if I think about that same idea with a two-dimensional integer array, so let's make a new integer array that I'm going to call grid. I don't know, it's 3 by 6, let's say. Now remember, this grid is going to be, we can't print it out like this, sorry. Now remember, this grid is going to be filled with zeros until I fill it with something else. So when I first print this grid, I should expect there to be values of 0 everywhere. However, if I make a method that again is a void method, meaning it has no return, and I'll call this one array method, that's expecting an input of a two-dimensional array. If I do something like make the input array of 0, 0 equal to 100, without doing any kind of return, if I call this method of my grid, and then I reprint out my grid, we will expect that our grid actually does in fact change. So I'm going to comment out these print statements so that we don't see anything with the x. And I'm actually going to put a separate like print line statement just in here to give us a little bit of space between the first and second version of this grid. But what we expect is my original grid is zeros everywhere. My next grid, I actually have a value of 100 in that top left corner, which is what this method's job was to do. This method's job really right now is just to make the top left corner a value of 100. And it is in fact doing that. With no return statement, nothing actually being output out of this method, I'm changing the actual location values of my grid. And that's a difference. They are both technically pass by value, and those have to do with things at the level of the where and how information gets passed in. The difference is the thing that's being passed in here is all of the values of the array, where those values are actually their own special objects. So then we're actually able to change the values of those objects inside. Versus when we're passing in this variable x, we're not actually passing in the variable x, we're passing in the integer value 20. So we are in fact changing that integer value 20 to be 19, but that's not being then returned back or associated back with x unless we use some type of return. In this array method, the thing that we are changing is in fact being associated back because there's another layer of variables that are involved when we have arrays. And that's where we're going to leave that for now. Last thing quickly, pass by reference is something different, and in fact in Java we have nothing that is in fact pass by reference. Reference would be if I am giving the specific location of where my variable is saved so that I would then be editing the exact variable. So if I had something that was pass by reference, then instead when I say input and I put in an input here, it wouldn't be giving the value of 20, it would be giving the specific variable x, and then it would change it at the source. So for a moment, our arrays look like pass by reference. Given the way that Java is set up and created, nothing can truly be pass by reference because we don't know the address of where our variables live in memory. The JVM hides that from us, and that's okay. This is a specific type of pass by value where some things are actually changing. The values inside of the grid can be changed without returns.